Herky still remember that morning in January when the story broke. The kind that makes you stop scrolling, that catches in your throat. A baby should have died that night. Left beneath a dumpster in an alley during the worst cold snap we'd seen in decades. Nothing but thin hospital linen between her skin and the biting air. No mother hovering nearby. No explanation tucked into those folds. No damn chance. But the city didn't wake up to another tragedy on the morning news because someone, refused to leave. A scrawny grey and white cat, all bones and matted fur, had somehow wound himself around that child like he was the only thing standing between her and oblivion. And he didn't budge. Not when the rats scurried past, bold, with hunger. Not when police sirens wailed just streets away. Not even when his own body trembled violently from the cold he was taking in her place. He was still there when dawn broke through the narrow slice of sky above that forgotten alley, still curled around her, still breathing, and so was she. Before I tell you how this happened, before you learn his name or hers, take a second. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight, and if stories like this one, the kind that remind us of the quiet heroes, the ones who can't speak but somehow say everything that matters, if that's the medicine your soul's been looking for, hit subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just another survival story. It's about the moment an entire city stopped in its tracks and witnessed something none of us could explain. The watcher of 9th Street. Nobody knew where he came from. The folks who lived and worked in that neighborhood had glimpsed him, a blur between trash bins or perched on fire escapes like he was keeping score of the world below. They'd nicknamed him Ghost, said he'd somehow survived 3 brutal winters and that apartment fire on Westlake that killed 2 people. Some swore they'd seen him take down a raccoon twice his size when it ventured too close to the bodega, where the owner sometimes left scraps, but no one claimed him. No collar, no microchip, no name that stuck. He answered to no one. Until that night. Under the sickly yellow flicker of the streetlight at Franklin and 9th, he found her. Just a whimper, so faint you'd miss it if you weren't listening for the things most people ignore. A shape that had no business being wedged against that dumpster. He approached cautiously, sniffed the bundle. She moved, just barely. He froze, every muscle tense. Then, as if something ancient and unquestionable had taken hold, he curled his body around her, pressing close. The rumble started deep in his chest, that rhythmic purr. Not the sound of comfort, but of presence, of fierce, unwavering presence. And then he stayed. They remained like that for hours, while the city rushed on in its sleepless way, while snow began to drift down between buildings, while the temperature dropped another 8 degrees. The one who stayed. The call hit dispatch at 6:17 a.m. Darren Miller, sanitation worker for 12 years now, father of 3, working a double because Rodriguez was out with the flu again. His boots were soaked through with slush, joints, aching from the cold, when he turned that corner with his bin cart and just stopped. Froze mid-step. At first glance, it looked like nothing. Another pile of garbage, maybe a discarded blanket. But then he noticed the fur, the unnatural stillness, and then the tiny hand. The baby wasn't crying. That was what haunted Darren for months afterward. It wasn't wailing or flailing like babies should when they're cold or scared or hungry. It was just lying there, almost peaceful, with only the slightest rise and fall of its chest beneath the hospital blanket. And that cat, that goddamn cat, wrapped around her like he'd been molded for this very purpose. When Darren shouted for his partner, the cat didn't even flinch, even as he stepped closer, fingers clumsy with shock as he fumbled for his phone. The cat fixed him with a stare that wasn't wild or frightened. It was deliberate, like a sentry at a post no one had assigned him. Like this moment, this child was his responsibility and his alone, and no human, not this garbage man, not the cops, not the paramedics already on their way, was going to relieve him of that duty without proving themselves worthy. The ambulance arrived in under 4 minutes. They rushed to wrap the baby in thermal blankets, checking vitals, sliding in IV lines, strapping on monitors. The EMT, Jody Nguyen, 12 years on the job, kept muttering, "How is she even alive? How is she even alive?" her breath making clouds in that frozen air. And still, that cat sat there, watching. They tried to wave him off, to shoo him away. He wouldn't budge. So finally they scooped him up too, tossed him into the back of the ambulance alongside her. "He'll bolt the second those doors open at the hospital," someone predicted. But he didn't. At Mercy General, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights and the controlled chaos of the emergency response team, the cat, now being called Milo, by a nurse who'd seen too much that week, waited. He stationed himself outside the glass wall of the NICU like a small grey sentinel. Nurses whispered theories as they passed. Janitors left bits of their lunch nearby. One security guard even attempted to carry him outside, convinced he was a health violation waiting to happen. But every single time they moved him, he found his way back, and that's how the story began to spread. A labor and delivery nurse posted a photo during her break. Stray cat found curled around abandoned newborn in freezing alley. Hasn't left the hospital since they brought her in. Staff calling him the Guardian. I've never seen anything like this in 22 years of nursing. It hit local news within hours, then national by evening, international by the next morning. People who hadn't cried in years found themselves wiping away tears at their desks. Comment sections overflowed. A GoFundMe for the baby's future care hit 6 figures in a day. Donations of diapers and blankets, and tiny knitted hats with paw prints embroidered on them, piled up in the hospital lobby. A local artist even painted a mural on the brick wall 2 blocks from where it happened. Milo's eyes watching over the alley, a sleeping child nestled beneath his protective form. But with all that attention came the questions nobody wanted to ask. Who would leave their newborn like that? Why there of all places? Why that particular night when the forecast had warned of record lows? And how did a cat, a stray who'd known nothing but the struggle to survive, know to stay with her through that long, bitter night? No one had answers, but Milo never left her side. Names and shadows, they named her Hope. Not very original, I know, but sometimes the obvious name is the right one. No identification, no note of explanation. Just a hospital blanket already stiff with ice when they found her, and a heartbeat that persisted when medicine said it shouldn't have. The detectives worked the case quietly at first. No family members came forward, despite the media coverage. No hospitals reported a missing newborn or a mother who'd left against medical advice. Just a wall of silence, as impenetrable as the cold that had nearly claimed her. But then came a thread to pull. Mrs. Abernathy, 84 years old and insomniac, since her husband passed, lived on the top floor of a walk-up 2 blocks from that alley. She reported seeing a young woman sitting on her stoop around 2 a.m. that night, crying so hard her shoulders shook, holding something wrapped against her chest, and talking, Mrs. Abernathy swore, to a cat that kept circling her feet. Milo. He'd been there before. With doorbell camera footage from businesses along the street, they traced the young woman's path. Her name was Leah Porter, just 19. A childhood spent bouncing between foster homes, pregnant and terrified, alone in ways most people never experience. They found her 3 days later in a women's shelter across town, her wrists wrapped in white gauze. They told her about the baby, about the cat, about what Milo had done after she'd walked away, and she broke down, not with the guilt everyone expected, with something that looked almost like relief, like gratitude. "I prayed," she whispered to the detective. "I just prayed. Someone would find her before it was too late. I didn't know what else to do." Not someone, the detective corrected gently. Something. A place to belong. Hope recovered with the resilience only the very young possess. She gained weight, color returning to her too pale skin. Tests showed no lasting damage from her hours in the cold. A miracle, the doctors kept saying, though none of them could quite meet each other's eyes when they said it. She was placed with a foster family, the Martinezes, not just good people checking a box on some social worker's form, but a couple who'd been trying to adopt for years, who looked at Hope and saw not a news story or a tragedy but their daughter. And Milo, well, that was complicated. He wasn't exactly what you'd call adoptable. He hissed at reporters who got too close, drew blood when a city councilman tried to pose with him for a photo op. The hospital administration was running out of excuses to keep him around, health codes being what they are. But then something happened. Hope laughed. Just a soft, sudden bubble of infant joy as she lay in her hospital crib, and Milo, who'd been stubbornly planted on a chair across the room, lifted his head, looked at her, and with a deliberate calm that hushed everyone present, padded across the sterile floor and jumped up beside her, curled his body next to hers, just as he had in that alley, like he'd never left, like he never would. So, the Martinezes adopted him too. He went home with Hope a week later, to a real home, with a soft couch by a window that caught the morning light, with toys that jingled and food that didn't come from dumpsters, with a little girl who squealed with delight every time he deigned to purr nearby. And at night, when the house settled into silence and darkness, Milo would take up his post outside, the nursery door, silent, watching, just in case. Ghost remembered. The years passed, as they always do. The mural weathered and faded. The hashtag stopped trending. News cycles churned onto fresher tragedies and miracles. People mostly forgot, but not Hope, and certainly not Milo. He grew older, as strays who've lived rough tend to do. Faster than pampered house cats. His movements became slower, more deliberate. His walks around the yard grew shorter. His signature purr developed a slight rasp. But those eyes, those amber eyes still burned with fierce attention whenever anyone new came too close to the girl who was no longer a baby. When Hope turned 6, she brought home a crayon drawing from first grade. It showed a grey cat with white paws standing protectively over a tiny swaddled baby beneath a yellow streetlight. "That's when Milo became my brother," she explained to her bewildered teacher, with the matter-of-fact certainty only children possess. And somehow it stuck. Because Milo was never just a pet, was he? He was a line drawn in ice and darkness. The dividing point between one ending and another beginning. The reason one story continued, when by all rights it should have ended before the first chapter was written. When he finally passed 14 years after that January night, the Martinez family buried him beneath the sprawling oak tree in the backyard. The one Hope had climbed countless times while he watched from below, tail twitching with anxiety, until she was safely on the ground again. And every year, on the anniversary of the night they found each other, she lays a single white flower on that spot, because some heroes don't need statues or medals, just someone who remembers. Some heroes don't bark. Every now and then, people spot her, a teenage girl now walking with her parents through the neighborhood that was once just a dateline in a news story. Sometimes they think they recognize her, maybe from an old headline or a photo once shared 1,000 times, and if you look carefully, you might notice the small embroidered patch on her backpack or jacket. It's of a grey cat with white paws, curled protectively, watching, and beneath it just one word: Guardian. Look, I'm not telling you this story to make you cry on your commute. I'm telling it because sometimes, in a world that feels increasingly cold, we need to remember that warmth can come from the most unexpected places, from beings who can't speak our language, but somehow understand what matters most, from creatures who've never known safety offering it anyway, from a stray cat who, for reasons science can't explain, decided that an abandoned child in an alley was worth staying for. If this story moved something in you tonight, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let someone else remember that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, with fur and claws just as often as with uniforms and capes. Drop a comment below. Has an animal ever changed your life in ways you couldn't explain? Maybe not as dramatically as Milo changed Hope's, but in those small moments that alter who we become. Hit subscribe if you want more stories that find the extraordinary in the ordinary moments we might otherwise miss. And remember what Milo taught us. Not all guardians walk on 2 legs. Some keep their vigils from the shadows, and some wait beside us through the longest, coldest nights when everyone else has turned away. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week with another story that reminds us what it means to be human, sometimes by watching those who aren't.